Good morning. I'm Peter Llewellyn, the priest in charge of St Nicholas Church, Floreat. I'm the Locus Tenens priest, that means placeholder in Latin. I'm holding the place for the rector Stephen Gibbs, who's on long service leave leading up to his retirement at the end of, or towards the end of April. And after that I'll be a temporary priest in charge until a new rector is appointed or something. It just decided what will happen with the parish. I'm talking to the people of the parish today. I hope to get this video to you by some means or other. I'm putting it up on the Facebook page, which is St Nicholas or St Nick's Anglican Church, Floreat. But not many people have joined that page, and not many seem likely to. I recorded a service last Sunday, but I didn't put it up or on the internet anywhere because I didn't think it was good enough. Neither the recording was good enough nor the content. We seemed just to be too far down. It was a very dismal day and a sad day. Today's another dismal day, I suppose, but not the same as last Sunday. It's Sunday the 29th of March, the 5th Sunday of Lent, and our second Sunday without services. This has left many of us not sure what to do or how to fix the problem, and I'm among them. I thought I knew everything about parish ministry, having been in it for a very long time, and I find that I don't. And I'm feeling my way like many others are. We don't have a lot of high-level technology in this parish. I spent some days trying to get the internet on. We've got that on now, and a reliable service. I suppose how it goes is dependent on what we end up doing. For now, those who know the rector's office will see that I'm there, not in the church. I decided that because I just felt that our trying to live stream services or do what the bigger or more equipped churches are able to do just seemed fake, not real. While I'd like to do that, we'd need to have a lot more cameras operating to make it interesting, and that's not possible. So I'm going to do some reflections on the Gospel for the day and some other things as we go through. Next Sunday is Palm Sunday. I don't know quite what we'll do there. I'd hoped to have an outdoor service, but we can't even have that. So it's still early days of this crisis caused by coronavirus, and we're all feeling that way. I said I'd do a reflection on the Gospel reading for the day. That's where I feel more comfortable. It's my territory, and I've been teaching the Gospels for many years, and the Gospel of John in particular is has been a main focus of my teaching. We've been working through some of the big stories in John Sunday by Sunday. The interview with Nicodemus, which led to the great affirmation that God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. We looked the next week at the woman at the well, and Jesus explaining that worship would be no longer in a place. Neither the Jewish temple nor the Samaritan worship site on Mount Gerizim, but in spirit and in truth. And that's become a very relevant message for these days. We've got to learn to worship not in a place. course, we've always done that, but we are used to having the place as our focus. Me no less than anybody else. I've been teaching for decades that we didn't need the place to worship. When I started the study of Judaism in the 90s or the late 80s, it hit me like a rock that the Jews faced exactly the same problem 1,950 years ago, 19 and a half centuries this year. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. They lost their place of worship. They had to learn to worship other than in the temple. They had begun worshipping in synagogues, which just meant a gathering of the men of the town. At least 10 of them were needed to form a synagogue, and they would meet in homes or later on in dedicated buildings for that purpose. But the dedicated buildings were only just coming in at the time the temple was destroyed. They had to work out a new way. And they did. The synagogue has replaced the temple to all intents and purposes within Judaism, although there are some Jews who hope that a temple might be rebuilt in Jerusalem. But for most Jewish people, that's ceased to be the thing. Of course, the synagogue is quite like our church, so we are one step further. We've lost our church for the time being. I hope we haven't lost it altogether. I know where it is. It's just over there. And I hope that soon the lovely worship that we have in that church will resume. But meantime, we've got to find it other ways. And it's not beyond our wit. On the Facebook page, which is important, although not many people have signed up to it, so I don't know whether it's going to be the final means of communication or not. The Archbishop has recommended that we have Facebook pages to do this, but it seems that our parishioners are not keen on Facebook, so we'll see. But on the Facebook page I'll be putting up every day readings and other resources, prayers and so on, for you to use to aid in that worship that you're stuck with on your own when you can't come and do it in the church with the other people you used to coming with. I still commend the Facebook page while at the same time I'm looking for other ways to proceed. Anyway, to John's Gospel. Last week, the Gospel reading was the story of the man born blind. Jesus and his disciples came upon him in the road as he was begging, and they asked the theological question, why was this man born blind? Who sinned? Because they believed that someone must have sinned for the man to be born blind. It was a punishment. Seeing a disability as a punishment is definitely not something we do these days. But they did then. Jesus' answer is telling and very important for us right now in this time of illness, which some people are blaming God for, saying God caused this plague in order to punish some people, or in order to teach us something, or in order to usher in the last days. All of those are false. God did not send the coronavirus any more than he made the man blind for some nefarious purpose of his own. Jesus said, we don't ask why he was born blind, what caused it. We might get a causal answer if we did, in terms of his genetics or perhaps his environment, but it won't take us very far. We need to ask the question, what purpose can it be put to now? And Jesus said it can be put to the purpose of showing the works of God. And so he heals the man, and the man goes and reports to the authorities, and all sorts of trouble breaks out. And it's a very funny story, and I'm sorry we didn't deal with it in church, because it's got so much to teach us. This week we have a more solemn story. Jesus' friend Lazarus is ill. His sisters, Mary and Martha, send a message to Jesus saying that Lazarus is ill and on the point of death. Jesus, for some inexplicable reason, does not go straight away. Why does he wait? He waits 2 days and a bit. On the 3rd day, he decides to go. By then, Lazarus had died. It must have been quite a puzzle to his disciples that Jesus would simply delay, and he doesn't ever give an explanation. It's one of the important things in the story. Remember that in John's Gospel, Jesus is the Word made flesh. He is God in the flesh. And he was in the other Gospels too, but it's nowhere near as explicit as in John. And in these stories, Jesus acts out what God would do, how God behaves in the world. He does it in all of them. He shows what God is like. If we want to know what God is like, we don't look to the Old Testament first. We look to Jesus. And Jesus gives us the standard by which to judge all other things, including the way God is depicted in the Old Testament stories, which is sometimes very different. Jesus is God. God delays. So important in our world where God seems to delay all the time. We pray and we get no answer. God doesn't seem to do anything. Sometimes we stop believing in him. It's understandable. I have no trouble understanding why people don't believe in God anymore, because he hasn't come through. He hasn't delivered. Should he? Should he answer our prayers straight away? Mary and Martha thought he should. When he got there, he has a sort of interview with both of them. And it's very interesting to see that they both use the same words, because in the acted parable that is this story, just an aside, Jesus doesn't teach in parables the way he does in John's Gospel, the way he does in the others. He asks them out. So this is an acted parable. And it's not just about Mary and Martha and Lazarus. It's about the nature of God and the nature of the world. So, when in this acted parable, first of all, Martha comes to Jesus. And Martha, she's practical, down to earth. She doesn't stand any nonsense. She says to him, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. That's a challenge, because you should have been here. You mucked around in Galilee, stayed an extra 3 days, could have got here in time, but you didn't. And Jesus answered, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus says to her, one of the most important things he ever says to anybody, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. Even though they die, will live. and everyone who lives and believes in me won't die. Do you believe this? And she says an extraordinary thing, but it makes sense in the acted parable. This is God on earth, acting as God does, with compassion and love. And Martha is driven to the point of recognising, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. She's the only person in John's Gospel who calls Jesus the Messiah face to face. He's that kind of person. And that satisfies her, a theological conversation. Okay, you've got your reasons. You are the resurrection and the life. Lazarus will rise again on the last day. And she goes and calls her sister Mary, who's a very different personality. Mary is the emotional woman, the one who listened to Jesus at his feet. In another story in Luke's Gospel, she's the one who, in John's Gospel, anointed Jesus with perfume. She does it in the next chapter, not this one. This one, she comes to Jesus and she says identical words to her sister. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Same words, entirely different. Different challenge, different question. Jesus answers her challenge and her question her way. That's what he always does. He deals with us our way, according to our nature, according to our needs. And he doesn't try to explain anything. He doesn't explain his delay. He simply says to her, where have you laid him? And he was deeply moved. He weeps. And those watching think he's weeping for Lazarus because he was his friend, and they say, see how he loved him. He's not weeping for Lazarus at all. He knows what he's going to do about Lazarus. Maybe he's weeping because he has to bring him back to this vale of tears. But he's not weeping for Lazarus in the way they thought. He's weeping for Mary, because he loves her, and she's distressed. God is always weeping for us in our distress. Do not believe those who say that God is indifferent to us, doesn't have feelings. Jesus showed that God does have the deepest feelings, the most important feelings. The same kind of feelings that we have, except at a God level. He loved Martha too, but he didn't need to weep to show that he loved her. He answered her theological questions. That's when the safe ground, I suppose, for him, for at least for me anyway. The rest of the story is pretty straightforward. He goes to the tomb, and Martha, ever practical, warns him that Lazarus will be rotting by now. By now he stinketh in the old version. She doesn't want any of that, but Jesus rolls the stone away and cries out, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus, come out. Come out of the darkness into the light. Every time we baptise a person, a little baby or an adult, we say, God has called you out of darkness into his marvellous light. And that's the truth. But sometimes the light is harder to handle than the darkness. In this time of coronavirus, you might want to retreat into the darkness. I plead with you not to do that. Retreat by all means into your home, be secure, be safe, but don't be in the darkness. Have the lights on. We had ours off for an hour last night for Earth Hour, but other than that, we want the light to shine. We want God's light to shine all the time on all of us. God does not explain his delay. His 3 days symbolically doing nothing, waiting for Lazarus to die. He doesn't explain that. He doesn't explain his delays in answering our prayers. He doesn't magically come down and defeat this virus and let us get back to living our oblivious, selfish lives, if we did. He doesn't magically deal with anything. He doesn't deal in magic. When Jesus performs miracles, such as the raising of Lazarus, it's never the point of the story. It's always incidental to who Jesus really is, because he is showing us what God is like. I want us to get that vision of what God was like. We've got 2 weeks to wait till Jesus comes forth from the tomb, risen with healing in his wings, as the hymn says. In that 2 weeks, let us reflect on God's waiting. It can be hard, but it can be fruitful too. And let us trust him. Above all, trust in God. That's what faith is. Nothing more, nothing less. May the Father who loves you bless you. May the Son who died and rose again for you bless you. May the Spirit who was freed into the world by the ascension of Jesus, so that he could be everywhere, be with you and comfort you and bless you. And I give you my blessing too. Bye for now. I'll see you this way again sometime soon.